In the quiet, eerie town of Fairvale, there stood an aging Victorian mansion. The Bates Motel, as it was known, was run by the seemingly harmless and unassuming Norman Bates. But behind that mild-mannered facade lay a tale of sorrow, madness, and unspeakable tragedy. Norman Bates was born into a troubled life. His mother, Norma Bates, was a domineering and deeply disturbed woman. She had never truly recovered from the trauma of a violent marriage and the death of her husband, and she carried her emotional scars into motherhood. Norma's obsession with her son was apparent from the moment he was born. She named him Norman, in part to maintain her sense of control, and raised him in a stifling atmosphere of dependence. She kept him isolated from other children, fearing that they might lead him astray, and homeschooled him in the dimly lit rooms of their sprawling Victorian mansion. Norman grew up in this environment of perpetual control and paranoia, unable to escape the clutches of his overbearing mother. Her relentless attempts to mold him into the image of her late husband left him emotionally stunted and trapped in a web of maternal control. The Bates Motel, nestled just off the highway, was Norman's only refuge from the world. With few friends and little contact with the outside, he spent most of his life in the shadow of his mother's overwhelming presence. The motel was a modest source of income for the Bates family, but it was also a symbol of their isolation. Norman's life was marked by a lack of autonomy. His mother controlled every aspect of his existence, from what he ate to when he slept. He rarely left the motel grounds, and when he did, it was only for brief excursions to the local grocery store or pharmacy. His mother's relentless presence was inescapable, and the isolation deepened his loneliness and fueled his descent into madness. The turning point in Norman's life came with Norma's sudden illness. Bedridden and frail, she became even more dependent on her son. Norman devoted himself to her care, bathing her, feeding her, and tending to her every need. He watched as her strength waned, and her obsession with him deepened. Norma's death was a crushing blow to Norman. The one constant in his life, the source of both his affection and torment, was gone. Unable to cope with the loss, he refused to accept that she was truly gone. In his delusion, he believed that she was still alive, still watching over him. His descent into madness accelerated as he preserved her corpse in the basement of the Bates mansion, fashioning a macabre shrine to the woman who had controlled his every move. He began to speak to her as if she were still there, holding conversations with her lifeless body. The lines between reality and delusion blurred as he adopted her persona in moments of extreme stress, becoming mother himself. Guests at the Bates Motel came and went, each one an unwitting witness to the turmoil within Norman's fractured psyche. His split personality, alternating between himself and his mother, led to a series of grisly murders. As the bodies piled up, Norman struggled to maintain a semblance of normalcy. The first murder was that of Marion Crane, a young woman who had checked into the motel after embezzling money from her employer. In a fit of rage and confusion, Mother took control, stabbing Marion to death in the shower. Norman, unaware of the grisly act he had committed, cleaned up the crime scene and disposed of the evidence, all under the influence of his alternate persona. As more guests met their gruesome fates, suspicion finally fell on Norman Bates when a private investigator, hired to find a missing guest, stumbled upon his secret. The investigator's curiosity and tenacity led him to the basement, where he discovered Norma's mummified corpse and a diary about Norman's descent into madness. In a tense confrontation, the truth was revealed, and Norman's dissociative identity disorder was exposed. He was arrested and institutionalized, his fate sealed within the walls of a psychiatric hospital. Confined to a padded cell, Norman's condition deteriorated further. He continued to converse with his mother, the line between reality and delusion blurring until he was completely lost within his fractured mind. The psychiatric hospital became his new prison, and the doctors struggled to unravel the complex web of his mental illness. Throughout his treatment, Norman remained trapped in a cycle of denial and delusion. He refused to accept that Mother was a creation of his own mind, a manifestation of his unresolved trauma and profound guilt. His conversations with her persisted, and he continued to live in a nightmarish world where she was very much alive. Norman Bates spent the rest of his life in the asylum, a broken man trapped within the madness he could never escape. His story became a cautionary tale of the devastating consequences of a traumatic childhood and a fragile grip on reality. In his quieter moments, Norman longed for the freedom he had never known. He yearned for a life that had been stolen from him by the insidious influence of his mother. But it was a life that could never be reclaimed, lost forever to the shadows of the past. As the years passed, the once promising young man faded into obscurity, forgotten by the world outside. His name became a whispered legend, a cautionary tale told to frightened children. And within the walls of the psychiatric hospital, Norman Bates remained, a tragic figure forever haunted by the legacy of his mother's influence. The tragic tale of Norman Bates serves as a haunting reminder that the scars of a traumatic upbringing can lead to a descent into darkness and madness. It is a story of a man consumed by the specter of his past, forever haunted by the tragic legacy of his mother's influence. In the end, Norman Bates was a victim of circumstances beyond his control, a pawn in a game of psychological torment that would ultimately claim his sanity and his soul.